case you haven't heard, Republicans still trying to repeal Obamacare. But the question is, does the newest plan hurt more people than it actually helps? We're going to get out of the politics and get into the facts. And another member of the Trump cabinet caught using a private jet at taxpayer expense. Just the latest example of people in this administration using the government as a piggy bank. Also, we will see how Puerto Rico is trying to recover from the devastation and the hit that it took from Hurricane Maria. And we also take a look how Mexico City's coping with a massive quake that just shook the city. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to in the next 60 minutes. So let's start with health care. The Senate remains on course to vote on its increasingly unpopular third crack at trying to repeal Obamacare. And while we still don't know how that vote's going to go, and there's every chance the thing could pass, we are learning more and more about what's actually in the bill, seemingly on an hourly basis. So we also know how few people actually want the thing, how much damage it could do, and how much more health insurance is likely to get depending on the state you live in. Now, our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, once again, the bearer in this case of bad news, Andrew. And again, there's red, there's blue, and there's dollars in the cents.
Yeah, and there's the politics and the polls as well, Rich. Most of the Republicans in the Senate seem to have made a calculation that repeal and replace is something they have to do because their voters won't forgive them if they don't. In fact, one Republican said that almost exactly yesterday. Iowa's Chuck Grassley telling reporters, quote, Republicans campaigned on this so often that you have a responsibility to carry out what you said in the campaign. That's pretty much as much of a reason for passing repeal and replace as the substance of the bill. Except when you check the numbers, there's no great demand to gut the Affordable Care Act, despite whatever promises the GOP made. In fact, 78% of all Americans want Trump and the GOP to make Obamacare work. That includes 57% of Republicans. Only 21% want Obamacare repealed and replaced. And speaking of Obamacare, or the ACA, it keeps getting more popular. 52% now say they have a favorable view of it. Only 39% look at it unfavorably. And 60% of all Americans say the Senate's failure to repeal and replace is a good thing. This may be my favorite bit of polling data on healthcare right now. It comes just from Republican voters. 68% of Republicans say they're disappointed that the Republican Party didn't repeal and replace the last go-round. Fair enough. But only 30% of Republicans say they're angry about that failure. So repeal and replace is not only not supported by Republican voters, they also don't care about it all that much if the Senate doesn't do anything. The biggest changes to the nation's health care under Graham Cassidy, as this bill is being named, would come from Medicaid, which helps people below a certain income level, those with disabilities, and it also funds a slew of programs that help even more people. So what happens to Medicaid under Graham Cassidy? Well, first come cuts, as federal payments shift from as needed to block grants to states that don't even have to be used for health care. Then come caps. The bill limits what states can receive from Washington for Medicaid, regardless of need or if prices go up. So states would have to decide what benefits to cut, which could, for many, make the difference between life and death. Finally, the bill kills Medicaid. The block grants are only on the books until 2026. After that, there's no funding mechanism for Medicaid payments to the states. The bill also dramatically shifts Medicaid money between now and 2026, taking huge chunks from states that expanded Medicaid and giving it to those that did not expand, all of which have Republican governors and are solidly red states. The big winners are Texas, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Missouri. The biggest losers would be California, New York, Maryland, Arizona, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And none of that gives you an idea at home of what might happen to you or your loved ones if Graham Cassidy becomes law. The bill would end coverage for up to 32 million Americans, including 15 to 18 million who would get the boot just next year. Premiums would spike 20% or more. If you're over 50, that increase could be as much as 500%. And women who may get pregnant, not just those who are looking to get pregnant, they'll have to pay more than men. The bill also kills all federal protections on pre-existing conditions, annual limits, lifetime limits, and essential benefits. Half of all Americans live in states that would be likely to end those protections, and people who get their insurance from jobs in those states could also lose those protections. If that happens, here's what it might cost. People with metastatic cancer would pay an extra $142,000 a year just to get health insurance. There are big surcharges for anyone with cancer, that you might expect, but a $20,000 a year surcharge if anyone in your family has a drug dependency issue. A pregnancy would boost your premium $17,000. Depression, $8,000. Diabetes, autism, and asthma would also add thousands to your premiums. Which may explain why these 42 groups, from the AARP and the American Cancer Society to the American Medical Association, the Heart Association, the Lung Association, health insurers, including Blue Cross Blue Shield, the March of Dimes, even the Multiple Sclerosis Society are all publicly opposed to this bill. It is a list that includes doctors, hospitals, health insurance companies, and a lot more. But that's a whole lot of data to try and digest, and anything healthcare related can get very confusing. So let's end this analysis by hearing from two people who are invested in the issue. First, for the past few days, we've mentioned that Bill Cassidy, the senator who co-authored this bill, has been feuding with Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel laid into Cassidy on Tuesday. Here's how Cassidy and then Kimmel responded yesterday.
I'm sorry, he does not understand.
Oh, I get it. I don't understand because I'm a talk show host, right? Well, and then help me out. Which part don't I understand? Is it the part where you cut $243 billion from federal health care assistance? Am I not understanding the part where states would be allowed to let insurance companies price you out of coverage for having pre-existing conditions? Maybe I don't understand the part of your bill in which federal funding disappears completely after 2026. Or maybe it was the part where the plans are no longer required to pay for essential health benefits like maternity care or pediatric visits.
Finally, let's hear from the man whose name is now inexorably linked to healthcare policy in this nation, Barack Obama.
When I see people trying to undo that hard-won progress for the 50th or 60th time with bills that would raise costs or reduce coverage or roll back protections for older Americans or people with pre-existing conditions, the cancer survivor, the expecting mom, or the child with autism or asthma, for whom coverage once again would be almost unattainable, it is aggravating.
All right, let's bring in our panel. Speaking of aggravating, Richard Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman from Westchester, now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. Happy New Year. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Bill O'Reilly, former Republican strategist, now a member of the Conservative Party. And the aforementioned Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, who put together that really good setup. Okay, listen. Obamacare is not perfect. Even Democrats, even progressive Democrats agree to as much. There's been a lot of partisanship that surrounded this as to who wants to own the hot potato. We'll get to the politics in a second. But the biggest problem that I have with what's going on with Washington right now, we got a little bit of that with Grassley, is this is as crass and callous a move as I've ever seen. So let me see if I get this straight. They don't want to do the math. They've done this in a way so the CBO can't even score this, so we can't really see what it is. They don't want to even have hearings to talk about what's in the thing or what isn't. And they're picking states based if they're red or blue, who's going to get paid off the most, so they'll vote a certain way. And basically they're saying, well, if you live in a blue state, you're screwed. You're in a red state, you'll be screwed down the line, but I'll take care of you till the next election. I'm not naive. It's not my first rodeo. I've seen how politics, how the ugly underbelly of it. But I had never seen it as transparently unseemly as this. Now, if you don't like it, and don't like it for a reason. But the president said nobody's going to lose anything on pre-existing conditions. Lie. Either somebody told me, never bothered to read it, or he knows and he doesn't care. But it's a lie. At least own what you say you're going to do, and don't do basically manila envelopes under the table to a state to say vote a certain way. I'm sorry. And to me, we're talking about health care here. It's not about a bridge to nowhere. This is real important stuff. This is why people think it's a swamp. And I think sometimes it's a cheap shot to go take a politician to call them all this and that. But when you see this, and you're talking about 3 or 4 people, what kind of deals do we have to do to get them to change their mind? This is the crap people hate, and I don't blame them. I'm sorry, I'm done.
I mean, I'll tell you what I like about it.
Go ahead.
Is the block grant side. I like moving things to the state, theoretically. I do not like some of the things you're mentioning. Andrew left nothing on the table but pulverized dust for that bill.
And it's all true.
And here's my problem again with the Republicans in Washington is they're so bad at communicating their message on this. When I hear everyone talking and heard Andrew's lead in, I kept thinking about the federal debt and the debt and the debt and the debt that's going to get us. And there's Republicans are trying to make really, really hard choices to deal with the debt. We don't hear any messaging coming out of it. We see secret hearings and then a bill come out that gets massacred by the healthcare industry that makes money off of healthcare.
Bourgeois.
No, not bourgeois.
The notion that this is a messaging problem, they're taking healthcare from 30 million people.
A lot of people will move into other kind of healthcare.
I'm going to let you have a chance to respond. The point, I think, and if I'm misstating it, say I'm wrong, is if they said, hey, listen, I'd love to do this too. I'd love to give everybody health care. But here's the economic problem. Forget about whether it's fair or not. Just say, hey,
yes,
we can't pay for this anymore. Somebody come to me with a magic way to have all this funding happen here and not the premiums go up, I'll hear it. But till then, this is the tough truth. And I'm sorry, but I'm the fiscal conservative who's going to say that the fairy tale ends here. If they said that, I still would take issue with it as you would. But to me, that would be at least more transparent.
No, that would be more hypocritical because at the same time they're doing that, they're talking about trillions of dollars of cuts in taxes for the wealthy that are going to spike the deficit. The notion that the Republican Party has a messaging problem is wishful thinking. It's the nicest thing I can say about it. They have a human being problem. No, but they're cutting health care for millions of people.
The country, and I don't mean to shift the conversation, Richard, too much, but the real problem is we have a revenue problem, and the only tax cuts that should ever go through are ones that create more revenue. Ones that are just nice to have, we can't afford.
The Republicans admit that they're going to spike the deficit, don't they?
So, on some of them, and I would disagree with those cuts. We need things to create revenue. We have to do it. We got a real problem on our hands.
But Dominic, to me, you have, so it's not like I'm telling you out of school. You don't have to do a hypothetical here. You have a son, right? And a son who will be impacted by this. And to me, I would hope in the next week and a half before they vote that more than talking about ballooning deficits, more than talking about hypocrisy on the taxes, we put real faces to this. And to be fair, Jimmy Kimmel did, okay? Now people may say, oh, he's some Hollywood guy, but he made the point. He has the scratch to go in his pocket to pay for it, but millions and millions of American families couldn't have done what he did if his kid didn't have coverage. So talk about it from this standpoint, which people say all of a sudden, wait a minute, what do pre-existing conditions mean? I think a lot of families know what it means.
Well, Richard, this is a political show. There are no political terms to describe what's being proposed. This has got to be the dumbest, stupidest idea I have ever heard in my life. So to say that you delivered, you're going to wreck American families. Brodsky was right. No offense, Bill. You're going to destroy American families. Oh, we're going to reduce the deficit. But 5 years after that, what's going to happen to that deficit when people are dropping like flies? When people need to go into these drug treatment facilities, when you have a pre-existing condition. My son has epilepsy. So what happens to a child like that? Under Obamacare, he was covered because he stayed in college, but he's about to come out he's out of college now. So what happens to kids like that? What happens to people with diabetes? What happens to people with congenital heart failure? What happens? What happens? You said you love block grants. I hate block grants.
You let the states decide, and if the states want to be more generous, they can do that. Okay, if New York, which pays more Medicaid than anybody in the country, wants to be generous, they can do that.
But when you do the block grant game, when the money runs out, people are going to die. It's as simple as that. Because these states, with governors trying to look good, are not going to allocate more money, and that's it. End of story.
And one technical thing, but as practical thing, Andrew, is they've already built it in that if a state wants a waiver, there's no government oversight that says no. It's already built in that if a state says, I don't want to do it, meaning there's no basement. Mm-hmm. They'll get the block grant, but if they don't want to spend, and they all acknowledge, New York State's going to lose. What is it? What's the number? Cuomo's already said that they're in the shortfall for this.
How do members of the House, the Republican members of the House, who were for the repeal, how does John Faso go out and vote for this?
He already said, I already told you his answer. He's already said, I don't know. He says, I have to look at it. And that answer is going to work for a while till after the Senate votes. And let's say they get that number. If you're a Republican in a blue state, you are screwed, Bill. Because at least Murkowski can say, even though basically the independent governor said he doesn't like it, but let's say they get cover in certain states where the Republican governor says, okay, Republican votes that way. But if you're in a blue state, and like we just listed all those states that go down the pike here that are going to get hurt by this, what do you do?
What about every Republican House member in New Jersey?
Right, that's my point.
7 Republicans. Christie has now come out against this bill because it's going to, New Jersey loses the 5th most amount in Medicaid funding throughout all this. So it really, there might not be enough votes in the House to pass this because of Republicans in the Northeast who lose it, but
Well, if it comes out of the Senate, it's going to change substantially in the House. I mean, there's
they
just no
can't.
question.
They can't because they're out of reconciliation time. It has to.
They have until the end of September.
It has to get passed as is by the House. They don't. There's no time.
Right,
think about
and
the
end of
House,
September, we're talking days. I mean,
I think it goes through the Senate. I think McCain backs it because Lindsey Graham is the sponsor, one of the key sponsors.
I think you
but
might
I don't
be
think
right.
it gets through the House.
And Rob Portman, the guys who voted yes the last time from Ohio, which gets murdered.
that's my wild card. People aren't using his name, and there's a couple others. You know, the point is, everybody thinks you can kick the can down the road to 26, but as you said, Andrew, there's more than 10 million people in this country that will be impacted. Want to do this in political terms before next November?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be within the next year. It'll be from the immediate Medicaid losses and the loss of Medicaid expansion. Those are the people who instantly lose coverage.
It's always loss of expansion.
Yeah,
Just keep that in mind.
And to me,
But they're
though,
covered now. They have insurance
right,
now.
right. To me, they gotta either be upfront why they're doing it, or they
Well,
have
but
to explain.
They can't do that,
Right.
Rich, because the public doesn't want to buy what they're selling. The Republican Party's
Well,
position is,
well, the public-
basically we shouldn't be in the healthcare business.
Oh,
We
you're
should
gonna
not
tell
be
us
The
helping
public didn't
people.
want Obamacare until it went out there, and it's very hard to take something back
Exactly.
from somebody.
And that's
impossible.
true.
And
If
the
it's-
numbers keep
if
getting
it's
higher and higher.
work-
We
if
just hit
it's
$20 trillion
working.
in debt. That's what I worry about my kids for, is $20 trillion in debt, and it's not stopping.
But let me ask
Don't
it- let-
It's not
fix the
stopping.
deficit on the backs of sick kids.
Let me ask a simpler question, which is, should the government be invested in saving and extending people's lives? And I think back to the beginning of the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We wanted a government.
Now I get your point. There's a math equation to this, and it's not adding up.
And you look like a
But
terrible person
what
for
I don't
talking
get
about
from a
it.
political standpoint is the Republicans had a chance very recently to make the Democrats own some of this and sit down with them and say, okay, fine, we're not going to repeal this thing altogether. You tell me how you want to change certain things. Let's deal with premiums right now. Make the Democrats have some skin in the game. Democrats recently have come at the table and said, fine, we'll sit down and negotiate. And all of a sudden, McConnell goes, too late, we're not talking.
It's exactly what I wanted. Was the Democrats and Republicans to have to work on it together?
Make
Because if
modest
you don't have
changes
skin
to
in the game,
this.
you know the other side's going to beat the
Right.
heck out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we come back here, speaking of health, the health secretary, Tom Price, he seems to have an unhealthy love of flying on private jets. Trouble is, it's costing taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars. And if you say, okay, well, what's that? He's the guy screaming more than anybody that he says the government shouldn't even have private jets. We'll talk about that and more after this.